Broadcasting.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Settler's Lament, and I'm joined here by the Distributist, Mr. Patriarch, Aaron McIntyre, and Renaissance Man should also be joining us later. And yeah, so today the topic of our stream is going to be the grill pill, and more broadly, just how do we survive in a world or a country, etc., that hates us. And what do we do, especially now that it appears that we're going into an incoming Biden administration that, could turn around, fingers crossed, but it at least appears like that's quite likely at this stage. So that's going to be the basic topic for our discussion tonight.
Great.
Sweet.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying sweet.
Okay. So I don't know. Does anyone have anything they'd like to start us off with?
I was thinking, as far as I'm aware, the grill pill was kind of Dave's idea. So if he could maybe sort of outline that would be cool.
Oh no, it's not my idea. This has been a thing on the internet forever, and I guess I just sort of re-underlined how it was. I mean, essentially, the grill pill is the idea that we want to first and foremost interact with our families and with reality and with the things that kind of give us joy. And I think for a while, the grill pill was sort of a radical centrist trope. And then I think one of the people from El Chapo Trap House on the far left started talking about it. But then he kind of fell off the edge of the earth, as these people want to do. And I think this idea of recentering oneself on a concept of pursuing the good in your personal life is something that's much more at home and much more useful to the right. And now I'm not so sure exactly how this is going to play out in present year. I think we're in this sort of weird state of limbo right now. And I don't know what the political reality even is going to be. It's obvious that there's some transition that needs to take place in the next month, but we really don't know what the order is that's going to emerge from that. And we also see a government that really doesn't feel very much restricted in how it's going to interact with people in their everyday lives.
Yeah, I think normally, a lot of us have probably been on here saying, if you can pay attention to the politics and you can share ideas and you can, you can better yourself in those ways. But at the end of the day, the best thing you can do is to, go to church, have a family, do better at your job and kind of make sure you take care of yourself and your circle first. And of course, with the way things are going right now, that's something that is still true, but it's increasingly difficult to focus only on your family when the political is intruding in every way there now. And so that's something that we all are going to have to learn how to strike a balance with is how much you can push back, but while also making sure you're maintaining, your household. You have to take care of your house first. You have to take care of your family first. You have to do that before you can do anything else. And as the government, reaches out and forces more and more on people, I'm lucky I'm in a part of the United States where lockdowns have not been as serious and it hasn't been quite as impactful, but I know in other places it's absolutely ridiculous. And so, that's something everybody's got to kind of make an individual decision on and something that everybody's going to have to keep more of an eye out for going forward.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. And as you sort of touched on, Aron, it seems like the grill pill will manifest itself in sort of different situations, right? So it's tailored to, your response is going to be somewhat somewhat rely upon your surrounding situation, right? So in states where the lockdown restrictions are more sane, you can afford to live a more normal life. Whereas in, if you're in New York City, that might be a problem. So yeah, it's, I guess there's no one solution to this.
Yeah, and I know people who are specifically avoiding, traveling back to see family in places in like New York and that kind of thing because they simply don't know when they'd be able to get home if they hit the wrong restriction, if something happens, if they decide to change things at the drop of a hat. I mean, it's to the point where people are really having to, all make a lot of decisions, which is kind of interesting because I wonder if the differences between states and the restrictions between states is going to change the way everybody looks at these things, as different states have long-term outcomes. If one isn't significantly worse than the other, I mean, obviously you're going to have the lockdown states blame the non-lockdown states, just, the gun control argument all over again. Well, my neighbor isn't doing it. But I think, hopefully the people will be able to, like said, be able to still disengage and politically at times and be able to take care of the things that really matter at the end of the day.
I guess I'm not. I mean, this is literally my situation with my in-laws, is that we can't visit them because we can't get stuck at the border, which is a big possibility. One of us runs a temperature and suddenly we're stuck in quarantine for 2 weeks with, no support. And that's, it's been really impactful, but I'm not trying to blackmail people, but I'm not so sure that even if the states that don't lock down, they do better, I don't think that's going to really make anyone reconsider their position on all of this at all. Let's look at Sweden, right? Like the poster child for the left in any normal year. They basically had no lockdowns. And as far as I can tell, they're not doing significantly worse than a place like Britain, who's had tons of lockdowns. And does this cause the people who are trying to drive the paranoia up to 11? Does this even cause them pause? Not that I've seen, at least.
No, I fear you're right about that. And I think the sad thing is you can't even look, from different party to party and who's in charge of the state. I forget which Republican it was, but there's a Republican governor who was talking about how he's going to have public schools in his state basically interrogate like 7-year-olds to find out if there's anybody over for Thanksgiving. And if your family, celebrated Thanksgiving, then they were going to lock you down. And I mean, it's insane what, the grill pill is something that, we've definitely talked about, and it's important, and something that you still want to be able to maintain if you can, but it is absolutely something that has become less and less of an option. And even to the point where the people who are ostensibly supposed to be fighting against this stuff turn out to be, more than willing to, make sure that your second grader, snitches on you so they can lock down your family. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, but this opens up sort of this question about at what stage does the left destroy its own credibility, or is it even possible? This is something that I've been asking myself a lot. I've been asking myself this question quite a bit just internally over the last month. Is what this seems like this must come back to the left at some stage, because now the left, or at least the radical left, they mock the idea. They mock whenever conservatives make the so-called tolerant left, they make fun of that when conservatives say that, like, they should be some expectation that the left is tolerant. But at some stage, if reality is reality, it's going to get to the point where the left can't claim to be pro-freedom, or the left, or at least the moderate left can't claim to be pro-freedom. The left can't claim to be pro-tolerance, or at least their claims in this direction are sort of farcical. And you have to imagine that some kind of reckoning is coming up at some stage.
I would.
Can I ask a quick question? Dave, do you know that your mic is a bit off?
Oh no, really?
Yeah, they're talking about it in the chat, and it's like a little bit, painful for the ears.
Okay, well, I guess I can try to change computers and come back in, but this thing apparently is not working. Maybe I can leave and come back in later.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, something that Dave was talking about, basically that at some point the left is going to hit a wall, and that wall is going to be credibility. I think that's already sort of being played out right now. And just as one example of this, I'll do U.S. first and then locally. In the U.S., at least amongst Republican voters, a vast majority of them absolutely believe that the election results are illegitimate. And, you could just say that's one example, but I think it's a pretty big example. And it shows that to a certain extent, the cathedral, as it's called, has less control as, one might think, at least over a big chunk of the population. Now, of course, as, Aaron has mentioned in sort of his stream with Morgoth and whatever, there is disagreement, right, amongst the people who think the election was illegitimate. You have civic nationalists, you got sort of America First types, you got and ANCAPs and everybody, right? So that's a problem. But I think that the story that the left is trying to sell itself, is trying to sell the American people, is becoming less credible with time. And here in South Africa, we see a number of things play out. And South Africa is a weird example because it's not really a country because there's no such thing as a South African. There's Afrikaners and then there's English South Africans, and they're very different. Even though they're white South Africans, they don't even speak the same language. And they think about each other in different ways. And amongst the black South Africans, you got the Xhosas, the Zulus and Vendas. And then where I live, the biggest racial group are the coloreds, which is not a slur. That's what they call themselves. They're mulattoes. So I like to think about them as sort of the Mexicans of Africa. And they all handle what's told to them in different ways. So here in the Western Cape, the province where I live, they just vote for the opposition party, which is basically like a sort of liberal centrist party, right? Because they see the ANC as an existential threat. And so the provincial government, is basically the minority, is the minority party. But even amongst the black South Africans in the other parts of the country, as the share of the ANC's vote total over the years has declined. So although they have a majority, the amount of people who actually vote for the ANC goes down every year. Now, this might be a sort of an African phenomenon where instead of voting for the minority party, they just don't vote at all. But I do think it shows and particularly in the urban areas, there's a noticeable decline in the respect and the belief that the current regime can deliver on its promises or can be trusted. So I think they are sort of reaching a tipping point in these various countries, in the US and in South Africa. But of course, what comes next is the big question. Anybody?
Sorry. Yes. I mean, how close have you have you ever known any of the black South Africans very well? What would you say their opinion is currently of the ANC?
Yeah, well, in my specific circles, non-surprisingly, I hang out with English speakers, but I do, I have black friends, and they are more, they're very skeptical of the ANC regime, and they're, kind of more right-wing, Tradden-based and all that, Christians and whatnot. And there's a disconnect between the black population of South Africa and the ANC's policies. So black South Africans are pretty Christian, are overwhelmingly Christian. And of course, they have different denominations and whatever. But like, for example, gay marriage is legal in South Africa, but the vast majority of South Africans do not support gay marriage. The vast majority of South Africans are pro-death penalty, but the death penalty was abolished. The vast majority of South Africans are against illegal immigration, which is actually a big problem here. You have lots of Zimbabweans and Angolans and Mozambicans coming across the border, and the Zulus, Xhosas, and everybody else, they don't particularly like it that much. So what we're seeing here is they're holding on to sort of the founding myth of the ANC is defeating apartheid, right? And they have a lot of brand loyalty for that, especially amongst the older generation of South Africans. And in the poor rural areas where a lot of these people come from, they do see modest improvements. But the big problems that you really see are in the cities. And support for the ANC in the urban centers is under severe pressure. So I think the problem, though, is that what comes next after that is the big question. So a lot of them are sort of, they sort of want a big sort of contender party right now is the Economic Freedom Fighters, who are basically a weird hybrid of Black nationalism with Leninism. So they're a real scary party, and they're explicitly anti-white. But I'm not so sure. I think South Africa actually is ripe for a sort of law and order, sort of strongman, kind of like, I'm going to make things work, sort of an outcomes-based sort of president. I think that would do really well here, like basically a Black Trump. Somebody like that would do very well here. And they're trying to get that off the ground, but we're just not seeing anything sort of come up as of yet. So what's been happening is you're seeing South Africa splinter into de facto smaller and smaller spheres of power. So the roads don't get fixed, so communities fix it themselves. The police are inefficient. So since 1994, the amount of security guards is now over 500,000, and police have only increased by 50,000. So people are taking these things into their own hands. And yeah, I just think what's most likely going to happen is things are just going to sort of stall out. And yeah, I don't see a whole lot of positive change coming for the country. But the US, I think it's a very different situation, but you might sort of see the same sort of a tamer sort of phenomenon happen, where regionalism and sort of local counties and whatnot taking powers onto themselves to what extent they can start to play out.
And yeah, I don't know. I mean, that situation does sound kind of similar in the sense that the ANC may be discredited, but they're still going to win every election. And I'm vaguely familiar with South African politics. I'm not super familiar with it, but they're in like a permanent coalition with the EFF, and most of the votes they've lost have gone to them. So it's not like it's really harming their ability to govern. So it's, people may be upset with them. They may not like them very much, which is, that's the standard line you get from most Democrats is, oh, the Democrat Party kind of says sucks, but the Republican Party is much worse, at least from progressive Democrats. But that doesn't mean that they're going to stop voting for them anytime soon. I mean, you have like literal communists saying that, oh, the like people like Vosh that say that, oh, the Democratic Party is like a horrible neoliberal party, but I'm still going to vote for them. So
can you guys hear me now?
Much better.
Yeah, I wonder on that point, Settler, if I always wonder when the Vouch formula is going to stop working. Because as he's gotten more and more popular, there have been more and more Vouch clones that have come up on BreadTube, especially on Twitch. And they even copy his mannerisms. It's really funny. Like the overblown, holy shit, that whole stuff. And I always wonder, is a Biden administration going to destroy his brand, his sort of game he's playing? Because it's so formulaic, anyone can do it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think also being able to just go yes to that and just completely take any wind that he has out of any sort of emotional flourishes that he's going to do is going to help as well. Because I know that, like, he's trying to hype up the audience, and if you don't correspond to that by getting heated as well, right, it's a really boring show to watch.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think Vouch has demonstrated that he doesn't necessarily have to have someone to play off of to become very popular, which is what makes it even easier for that formula, right? He just reacts to news events these days. I don't think he's really been in the debate circuit for quite some time now, right?
Yeah, but he had
sort
to
of
build up
became
his
a rough version
audience.
of internet blood sports. Now it's just become like basically, a solitary shit posting stream that goes on for like 6 hours.
Yeah, but he had to build that initially through debate. So yeah, I suppose with Vosh himself, I mean, he'll eventually burn out like a lot of the blood sports channels do. But to actually build the channel in the first place, you have to go out there and start taking scalps.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, the Bloodsport channels burnt out because they were suppressed. So they couldn't play to the edge. And so you have these people like Ethan Ralph, when they get banned from their platforms, then they take a big hit that they have a very, very hard time recovering from. I'm not so sure that mode of failure is going to really exist for people on the left in nearly the same way.
I mean, maybe I underestimate or overestimate, because I can imagine that getting boring after quite a while and people seeking out novelty, particularly with the left-wing people, because left-wing people, regardless of how much we may like to disagree with it, tend to have like a slightly a higher IQ than the average right-wing person. So I can imagine those sorts of people seeking out novelty more intensely. But I might well be wrong.
I think you might
know it is more educated, if not higher IQ. I think it might actually be lower native intelligence, but it's certainly more educated.
Oh yeah, like I'm not talking like a substantial amount. I'm talking like 3 or 4 IQ points. I'm not talking about like orders of magnitude or anything. Like it's the difference between your average builder and your average English language graduate, right? Like there isn't really going to be that much in it. to be quite frank.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I don't know. I mean, I kind of get what you're saying, Dave. But the issue is the lack of self-awareness of the left is really quite extreme. Like, they had the Occupy Wall Street stuff, which started under Bush, but that continued to be popular throughout like the first 4 years of Obama, and there was no like that disconnect really never became very clear that these people who claim to be anti-establishment are the same people who are voting for Obama. And that they control everything. We seem to be in a sort of similar situation now, where it certainly did help rev up the left a lot the Trump years. But if we are going into a Biden administration, I'm not convinced that just the severe cognitive disconnect that the left has isn't able to still sustain that.
Yeah, I wouldn't underestimate the power of controlled opposition, right? Like how long have Republicans managed to sell, their voters on, just one more round, guys, and then things will really change. Just one more time. Just you got to fight for the Senate one more time, and then we'll really do the things that you're looking for. You'll finally get your results. I think there's a very long time for people, especially on the left, who are going to go with okay, well, obviously, like you got to fight Cheeto Hitler, so we have to vote. We have to vote for all these people who do all the things we hate, but we're going to work really hard to push them even further left and get that luxury communism we've been promised. I think there's a lot of mileage. I mean, you'll see some people burn out for a while. I guess it becomes obvious to some extent who the establishment is, but that is, I guess, the utility of Trump, right? Is he gave them put some more wind in their sails. I'm not saying, I like a lot of what Trump did, but I'm just saying that it gave him another excuse to push that down the road for at least another 8 years of, hey, at least we saved you from the far right, right? That was worth teaming up with us again. I think there's probably still a lot there for them to do.
Well, the question is, and this is an open question, I don't pretend to have the answer to it. To what extent does having a credible right-wing opposition, I mean, it obviously unifies the left, but how important is that? If the Democrats just say, fuck you to the far left, pardon my French, and then we get another 4 years of Obama-type policies, what happens? Do people like Valsh and El Chapo Trap House, do they just kind of become a peanut gallery kind of entertainers that kind of play to the professional left, but don't actually do anything that threatens the agenda of the Democrats? And this is sort of the agreed upon deal that they make. I don't know.
I mean, I think they can drip feed the social progress to their to the far left, and keep them locked down on finance for a long time, right? They'll just freeze the neoliberal economics in place. They'll keep pushing that, and then they'll just keep delivering them, theoretical wins. I guess at some point that has diminishing returns, but I think that they can fool them for a long time. And that's why you're going to see people like Vaush going out less and less and doing battle, because there's still plenty to be made reacting to articles, and tweets on YouTube. There's no shortage of grift there. So,
yeah, I would agree with that. I think so. Something that Renaissance Man was mentioning earlier on, and Dave as well, about sort of the sort of content that we're going to see from these guys. I think the dream will be alive, but much the same way as kind of new atheism YouTube sort of saw its high point and then petered out, and same with the social justice cringe videos a few years ago. I think that's going to get old, but I think so the form will change, but the ideas will remain. And as far as the union of the Democrats and the radical left, I was listening to a guy who's had I think his son or his daughter worked for a time at Goldman Sachs. And what they were saying is ideologically or culturally speaking, the people who worked in Goldman Sachs that they worked with were radicals. So I don't think we're not, so they'll throw them a bone on the cultural issues. And global capital is very happy to sort of advance that agenda. And I think that for a long time, at least, might be enough to sort of placate the left without necessarily, giving them control of the resources.
Yeah, I guess the question is, and might be where the grill pill comes in, is I think that this sort of practical division might sustain the left for a really long time. That's my suspicion. But it's also going to create content that is, to be quite honest, really soulless. I can imagine Vaush pretty much continuing indefinitely because he's not going to get banned. And there's always going to be a number of overeducated, brainless communists that want to get validated. But I don't think that he is ever going to really inspire anybody in some kind of larger way. When I see people like ContraPoints, their early career, I think a lot of the people who were fans of them that said that they were inspiring, while I can't personally understand it, I do think that was a genuine emotion. Whereas I think that these content creators, they're really going to be creating content as sort of a holdover for their audience, sort of a dopamine hit for their audience, so that their audience can kind of keep on going. No one's going to get inspired to become more left, because I think it's going to be transparently very, very staid and very, very uninspiring. I can't imagine it being anything beyond just really a grift. But again, that's me underestimating them.
One question I have about the ContraPoints thing for you, Dave, is when they say inspired by ContraPoints, to what extent do you think that was the content as opposed to the aesthetics of ContraPoints?
Well, I mean, the idea of ContraPoints is that here is this YouTuber. I mean, none of the takes that ContraPoints has are fresh. Let's be honest. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that here. But I think just even if this was a group of leftists, I think is a factual statement that they're all recycled leftist ideas. But what was inspiring about ContraPoints was the idea that this was a person, finally the person had come to speak truth to power. The same way that Jon Stewart was fresh during the Bush administration, right? Jon Stewart was fresh during the Bush administration, and he rapidly was becoming more and more stale during the Obama administration. And he hopped ship right at the correct time. When you look at someone like, who's the guy who replaced him on The Daily Show?
Trevor Noah.
Trevor Noah. Yeah, it's completely uninspired. And I don't think anyone's really excited about that. They're just in a pattern of watching this kind of humor that they've gotten into with the last 10 years of Jon Stewart. And I think that the aesthetic of ContraPoints is indistinguishable from the message of ContraPoints. And the message and the aesthetic is, here comes this new person with this really, really fresh take, and they're going to be the one that gets us there. They're going to be the one that cuts through all of the bullshit now, finally. And we're now back on track, and now we can believe again in this thing, and called the progressive vision of the future. I don't think that that's going to be easy to manufacture one of those emotions in the Biden administration. And I think in absence of that, what you're going to be facing is a large leftist coalition of very, very uninspired people that are going to kind of be looking around for different things. And this is where I think the grill pill is the opportunity for the right. Because if authentic community can be created, and who knows if it can, if we're on perpetual lockdown and everything's shut down for the next decade, we will have to think of something radically different than even this. But presuming that we're operating in something approaching a normal operating reality, if healthy communities are created and healthy individuals are put forward, the left will have a very, very difficult time answering their existence. Because if you look at the left right now, they're just, I'm copying this observation from the Franklin, but they're just hideous. They're absolutely hideous people. They're obviously people who don't have their lives in order, and because of this, you really wonder where their movement's taking you if it's not going to be towards John Lennon's Imagine in very, very short order. And I think if that dynamic plays out for a long enough time and matures appropriately with people who are genuinely inspired, I'm not going to say we're going to have a right-wing movement in the classic sense, but you're going to have a number of movements that are non-progressive or counter-progressive that emerge from that space, and that will genuinely try to seek both politic and aesthetic approaches that go directly in opposition to what the left is putting forward right now. Sorry for rambling there, Settler, but
No, that was great.
If I might interject, right?
Sure,
Like
sure.
it seems, and granted, I'm not somebody who watches much leftist or even really political content anymore, but it seems to me that these people largely survive off of, through their entertainment anyway, the tickling of their moral nerves, right? So it will always be something along the lines of, oh, we have this loving cause, it's against global warming, or it's against bigotry of some form, or it will be crucify the bigot, right? So I think that if there's going to be any sort of destruction of the left, or any sort of approach to the left that might change it, it would need to somehow tap into this, right? Like I think a friend of mine, it was a friend of mine, said to me once, the language that they use is so utterly meaningless that you can change the meanings of the words that you're using over time slowly, so that they end up advocating for some things that they would have otherwise considered morally wrong, just because of the magic word effect. In fact, I think you made a series on, Dave. If you have a YouTuber who taps into that initially, like with all of the all of the buzzwords meaning what they mean, and then slowly over time change them to something saner. So like if they map equality onto human essence as opposed to human existence, you could have like these people stop being like living such bad lives, and they could be living good lives, and we can improve their lives as well.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with that in theory, but I mean, I don't think you're ever going to. I mean, what you're saying is we can use language manipulation tactics to kind of undo the damage the left has done. I don't. No, okay, maybe I misunderstood.
I'm not saying that. No, what I'm saying is taking individual leftists and bringing them back to a modicum of sanity.
Yes, I think that's. I mean, if you look at someone like Angela Nagel, who is someone that I really appreciate, that would be sort of. I mean, Angela Nagel is basically a right winger, right? She's right winger. So she thinks that she's old labor, right? I don't know what's the Irish equivalent of labor. I don't know, whatever.
I mean, there isn't really. I mean, you could say DUP or IRA, but really they're along different lines than Labour and Conservative, completely different. So yeah. I'm not sure it's comparable.
Well, I mean, she's old school Irish working class politics, right? And she was a leftist, and now she might as well just be a right winger at this stage, right? Because she is, and that's because she's more focused on the communities than she is on the ideology. And I think this is, I don't know, I think this is going to be where people are going, and I'd rather have one Angela Nagel than 1,000 Bosches.
Yeah, one thing I observed while I was at university, right, is that it's not so much. It's like how St. Paul talks in his letters, right? If you read St. Paul's letters, he'll start out with some sugar, and then he will come in with the real criticisms, right? And it's the same with these sorts of people. You have to give them the sugar. You have to give them the, oh, we're anti-bigotry, oh, we're anti-racism, all of that, like, moral sentiment. And then you got to really whack them with, like, here's where you're going wrong. Here is how I don't mean in like a single piece of content. I mean over the course of months. Like, and then you hit them with like, right, we can't assert the absolute human equality because that means that you're denying that this person is black, right? You cannot assert that I don't know, a man is equal to a woman because you're making that woman sacrifice her womanness to be equal to the man, right? Like, and you just go this further and further along, and then you bring them to something that's more sane.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, besides that, I mean, the only thing I can see is these people steadily degenerating themselves further and further and becoming even worse than they currently are.
Well, I mean, yeah, I have to imagine there's going to be a parting of ways. I don't know. It seems like I feel really, really cautious about building predictions, but I really feel like there has to, at some level, be a parting of ways.
But I can't see all of them sticking on to the absolute complete conclusion of what they were saying, because yesterday I was debating with an atheist who is completely nominalistic. For those who don't know what nominalism is, it's essentially saying there's no real existence of such as categories, right? Like human category is just an arbitrary name, right? And I managed to convince him to admit that he was a big black man called Deshaun from the Bronx, right? Now, the majority of people would find that ridiculous and would split away from that immediately, because that's absurd. He was clearly a white guy. But there will be this tiny core of people who will double and triple and quadruple down on that. And they will just die because they aren't living in accordance with reality. So that's the, you want to get the 80% that can still recognize, yeah, you're not actually a big black man called Deshaun from the Bronx.
I mean, in a certain sense, I think that sort of tactic of trying to point out the ridiculousness of the left can be useful, and it's an important thing to do. It's something that I do a lot. But on the other hand, the main problem with any left-winger is that they're still bought into the whole left-wing narrative overall. So they're happy to say that, like, okay, yeah, like this certain aspect of left-wingness is crazy and like this is going too far. Like you see this even with Sean Head. She still says, oh yeah, the bedroom feminists were stupid. And like, yeah, there's stupid parts of the left and stuff. But like, it's not getting her any closer to actually, not being a communist.
I agree, but what I'm saying is that you wrap them into the narrative of a particular channel such that it warps it over time. Like Sean Head probably has no idea what she actually believed 5 years ago, as I don't really have a particular like written down account of that. So you just change it over time by moving the language about so it corresponds to slightly different and more, correspondent things to reality.
Well, you've got to parse the people who are going along to get along and the true believers, right? Like there's a large degree of just conformity to the social norm, which is totally normal and healthy as long as the social norm is healthy. And that's what a large amount of people, even, a lot of people who are who may not be inclined to agree with the left are going to do so because it's what's going to further their career. It's going to what's going to make their conversations polite. It's what's going to just grease the social gears that they have to turn regularly. And this is going to be true for commentators as much as anyone else. most of these people are not rocket surgeons, and you don't need to be. A lot of times, success on YouTube is entertainment more than it is your, having all 57 points of agreement with the correct ideology. And so I think they will be, Siobhan Head is probably further left than she used to be because that's what keeps eyeballs on, and that's what keeps her socially acceptable. And so as
an aside here, it's really hard for me to see Siobhan Head. Originally, I saw her leftist transition as her being kind of a dupe, but given her tweets, I can't. It seems to me, it just feels to me totally like a grift. It feels to me just like, this is what the cool kids are doing. Sign me up.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with it. Yeah, it's what's going to keep it's what's going to keep the wheels turning, and so I think a large amount of it is that I think very few people are truly ideologically bought into the system. I mean, they exist clearly, and there are often people driving the boat, but it's not the vast majority of people. And if the winds blow the other direction, I don't think you're going to have to see people have their entire ideology refuted. I think it's just going to be the way most people turn when it's convenient for them.
And fundamentally, I think that element that you just mentioned, Aaron, is really the big problem. The grifters or the non-ideologues or the cowards or whoever they are, they could be any number of things. And this is something which is sort of plagued the conservative movement for decades, and why there's no serious right-wing movement in this country is because, or this country, in the old country, is because you have opportunists, careerists, grifters of one form or another infiltrate the movement and sort of take it over. And then once they're sort of in charge, they're always seeking to curry favor with the left. They want to be the Jonah Goldbergs of the world. They want to be respected in the New York Times, but they also have a value position as the token conservative opposition. So, these people sort of exist on both sides, as you're saying. It's a real big problem with conservatism, but also, I'll take your word for it. Siobhan Head is the leftist version of that. And of course, I think she does have probably some, leftist preconceptions, but dealing with this mushy, malleable middle is kind of, I think, the problem we have to overcome.
The right wing doesn't pay.
People
the right wing doesn't pay. Let's get that out of the way. People accuse right wingers of being grifters, and I agree when it comes to people like Dinesh D'Souza. But generally speaking, unless you're in a very, very elite caste, there is no such thing as the professional activist right for people who are just part-timers or hobbyists or who like the ideology or are true believers. Whereas there's just tons of money on the left. In addition to having sort of the well-respected people on top working in the university systems, there are activists who are just part-timers who go around making YouTube videos and protesting at town hall events and so on and so forth. They can live off of that. That's a job. There's no equivalent on the right.
Well, yeah, the left allows a degree of patronage the right simply cannot offer without power. I mean, not only the part-time activists, but I mean, just look at the massive amounts of machineries inside of universities, public education systems. I mean, how many of these things are completely captured by the left, and they're just make-work jobs for people who have credentialed themselves enough in the left-wing system to hold them? It's absolutely the case that there's far more money to be made managing the right and far more social respectability than there is actually trying to lead a right-wing movement in some way that's valuable.
Well,
Yeah.
you see,
That's a good way of putting it. I want to just,
That's a good way,
before
yeah.
you go on, I want to just make sure people get that. The people who get paid on the right are the managers of the right. They aren't the activists of the right. There is a lot of money in right-wing management. There's no money in right-wing activism. And it's almost the exact opposite for the left. There is actually money for left-wing activism.
well, you see, I think that if that's the case, then the approach of going through, obviously, politically differentiated right-wing thought is not the way to go, which is why I've gone in a more religious direction, right? If I want a more conservative society where there isn't degeneracy everywhere, where children can actually have a mother and father without people quibbling over whether or not they're teaching them about the 57 genders, I'm going to go the religious route, because there's like, I can point to the fact that I'm feeding the poor, right? So they can't call me some sort of like meanie to the poor. Like the best they can do is say like, oh, you don't like LGBTQ ABCDEFG, and it's like, well, I'm still like in the church, I can still look after these people. I just think that the lifestyle is wrong, and then show them why. And with the Catholic Church especially, you have gigantic amounts of material support behind that, right? You've got the largest single landholder in the entire world. Granted, one that's in a bit of a difficult position, but it's still better than the actually right-wing movements.
Yeah, I think the religious route is a correct place to put effort. I'm not want to put that down at all. I do think though that we have to go beyond just, we can't. I mean, this idea of, oh, we'll do charity, we'll be winsome, we'll be religious. People have tried this for a very long time on the American right, and it does have some good results, but it doesn't stop the crushing activist apparatus that is the left wing.
Yeah, the trouble with that, though, is because American religion is inherently fractured because of the freedom of religion instituted by the American state. If you were to go through Catholicism, go through Catholic teaching, right, you wouldn't just be feeding the poor and such. You would also be educating people, and you would have a gigantic apparatus like that is going to dwarf the American left, right?
I think maybe one of the issues, and maybe Dave was sort of inkling this way, is that even if you do have sort of a organized Catholic movement or whatever, it's still going to sort of butt heads with the left on a certain level. So, like in the United States, a good example of this is the Little Sisters of the Poor, and by law they have to furnish or pay for birth control, right, which is problematic for a Catholic holy order, which is devoted to the poor. And so they're trying to, go against this, but the federal government and, ACLU and whatever are coming down hard on them. And they've been fighting this court battle for years. And I think this is sort of an instance where at some point there's got to be some kind of, whether we like it or not, political pushback. Now, I would agree with you, Renaissance Man, that the backbone of what it is we're trying to build and what we should be doing is creating, some kind of authentic Christian civilization, and building that up as best we can by attending church, by getting involved, by looking after the poor, by starting families and whatnot. But I think there's also sort of unfortunately, this sort of temporal element as well. So I think we're where we kind of have to walk and chew gum.
No, like you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the Sisters of the Poor and the Jesuits and the Franciscans have a much larger bite than TPUSA. Like, they can bite a lot harder than they can. Like, TPUSA will run away from the left with its tail between its legs and say, why aren't you so tolerant? Why aren't you tolerant? Like you say, wait, the lefts are hypocrites? Like, they'll do that. And the priests, though, they'll go, yeah, like, you guys, you like advocate all of these things for the poor, but really you're destroying their educational opportunities and destroying their families. You vile, how vile Black Lives Matter is by telling blacks that they should just live in a village and there shouldn't be any families. And like, the church has the kinds of people who are courageous enough, first of all, and second of all, have more material support than TPUSA to say, well, look, you realize that this policy position is actually going to destroy African American neighborhoods, right?
I don't know. I want to agree with you and disagree with you at the same time. I mean, you understand that Christians need to help the poor, but we can absolutely positively cannot like buy the problem of poverty and go like, okay, guys, we'll take this on, because no matter what you do, they'll always throw the existence of poverty back in your face and claim that, like, if the problem of poverty isn't solved, then you have no standing to talk about any other issue.
No, Dave, I'm not arguing that.
And it's so cynical. The amount of cynicism the left can muster. Yeah.
Dave, I'm not saying that at all. Of course, I'm not suggesting that we can logically argue them into a point. What I'm saying is we can bite them a lot harder than if we use TPUSA. Like, we can cause a lot more pain. They can make them suffer a lot more because, well, frankly, the religious organizations have a lot more grunt than TPUSA does. That's my entire point. It's not anything to do with like solving the problem of poverty. That's a good thing. It looks good to the average person, right? But they will never be satisfied. What I'm saying is, like, it's a much more resilient place to be.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think what you're talking about is, to use the slang term, street cred, right? And I think that is true. I mean, what the right needs now is it needs a certain amount of street cred, because the left is going to lose it. I think the left is going to get taken over by keyboard warriors really quickly, and I think that does open up an opportunity for the right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so you've got a bunch of consecrated celibates who sacrifice their ability to have children for the sake of serving an organization versus a bunch of people who collect Patreons off of Twitch. Who do you think's got more skin in the game?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, for most people, even for many Catholics, the clergy just doesn't have the respect that it once had.
Yeah, but that doesn't actually matter if you've got people committed and doing things, right? It doesn't matter so much the opinions. We're not trying to win elections here. We're trying to change individual people. And so over time, over centuries, that will culminate in a societal change.
And this distinction is so subtle, right? Because the problem with the American Catholic Church right now is there are too few excellent Catholic priests, and the leaders in the church that aren't part of the clergy, well, A, they're totally disempowered to do anything, and B, there's this culture in the Catholic Church where lay leadership are kind of disregarded and looked down on. If anything, and this is not specifically a Catholic thing, if you're Orthodox or Protestant or whatever, or even if you're another religion that is faithful to an older tradition that centers spirituality, what we need strong leaders that can stand up and actually speak for a community and be recognized as being invested in the community. I think that so much of the right-wing media apparatus is basically these grifters selling themselves as representatives for communities that they don't actually represent. And I think that if we can get a better set of leaders in one of these regards, we have a lot of possibilities open up for ourselves. And I'm using leader in the most broad sense here. I also mean people who are leaders in the realm of art and the realm of content creation in other regards, not simply political or leaders of religious bodies.
Right. But also, I do want to point out the fact that we are dealing with an organization here that conquered the greatest empire to ever exist without firing a single arrow in 300 years.
You mean you're talking about progressives?
No, I'm talking about the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Empire.
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely. Well, but how did it do that, right? It had this core group of leaders that was, I think you look at the early church fathers and you see a church that is, we have a long way to go to get to that level of leadership and devotion.
I don't think we do. I see a lot of people, at least in my own community, who have maybe not comparable levels of fire, but aren't that far off. Some of them, like, they spend 6, 7, 8 hours a day reading the fathers, right? And they go out and they live that life, right? And this is what I think the grill pill really should be. It should be, the political people, like the keyboard warriors, who cares, right? They're going to waste their time. I'm going to apply my time to something useful, the acquisition of virtue, right? And suffering. Like getting suffering, which develops endurance, which develops character, which develops hope, right? I'm going to live that life. It's going to make me someone more virtuous. And as people are attracted to virtue, then that will bring people by osmosis to that, right? Over time. Like, I'm not going to bother, like, with Vosh. Who cares what Vosh says?
Yeah. Well, I do, in some sense, who cares what Vosh says? I do care about very large organized movements that can emerge from online. We need to be aware of that, even if we are going to devote ourselves to more real things, ultimately.
I guess sort of the question, kind of the conundrum we're in. I kind of agree with you, Renaissance man. If we look back, into the early years of the church, I mean, Jesus needed only 12 to get started, right? We got a lot more than that. The difference is, I think, is we're in a position now where trying to find these exceptional people of virtue and spirituality and saintliness, frankly, finding them and sort of having them be sort of more prominent and driving the church forward, sort of them being our standard bearer. So when people think of Christianity, they think about people like this, just as back in the day when people thought of Christianity, they thought of St. Paul and Peter, right? So now they don't necessarily think that way. When they think of Christianity, they think of mega churches and Joel Osteen and some situations, they might have some issues with the current pope or their bishop or whatever. So I think the secret is make Christianity great again, but that's going to be a process.
Well, you see, that's actually a misrepresentation of how people viewed Christianity in the 2nd century. People in the 2nd century, the generic pagan, viewed Catholics as the kinds of people who would gather in graveyards and eat human flesh, right? That was the typical view, right? And that's what actually caused St. Justin Martyr to write his first apology to the emperor. Likewise, there was also weakness in the church from the very beginning. The majority of people weren't these saintly pillars of virtue. For example, Polycarp is mentioned in the chat by Brian N., right? Polycarp would never have been killed if a Christian hadn't broken under torture and told them where he was, right? You will always have weaklings in the church. The difference is that, you see, we're stuck right now, looking at right now. We can't see the saints around us, but we do have a great advantage over all of these people in the 2nd century in that we have access to the writings that they were studying. We have a level of material wealth that, I mean, these people couldn't even afford shoes. And we can go now online and access all of the fathers. Granted, not all of them translated from their original languages. We can study the scriptures in a nice warm place, and we can, find information that we didn't have before, implement those practices through God's grace, and we have much greater means to acquiring said virtue, right? I mean, you're dealing. Yeah, we're not. There are some people that are, though. We just don't know them yet, right? We don't know. There could be an obscure nun in some in some South American monastery who's the next Saint Faustina right now. We don't know, because we didn't know who Saint Faustina was, and now she's the apostle of divine mercy, and she's everywhere. Right? She was a woman who died in obscurity in 1938 in Poland. Same with the apostles at one point. Do you think that the Emperor Nero knew who Paul and Peter were when he had them crucified? No, of course not. And likewise now. Why would it be any different now?
Yeah, I mean, I think those points are well taken. But I just want to make it, I think if an average person hears what you're exhorting people to, the environment, I think we need something in between where we are now and that. I don't know. Is Settlers Lament have any comments on this?
Well, yeah, it's just one of the things you said, Renaissance man, is the only way the only reason Polycarp died was because of the weakness of a man who broke under torture. I mean, I don't know if that's the standard for weakness back then compared to the standard of weakness today is pornography addiction. It seems like we're just in so much more.
We can't even win the wars against our own penises.
Yeah.
I don't know. If I could survive torture for any amount of time, I would consider that to be a pretty big win, honestly.
Well, you see,
compared to how we are today.
You seem to forget that the same Peter that was nailed to the cross was the same one that ran away from Christ at the last moment and denied him 3 times, right? Everyone is born in weakness. But the difference is that we have access to all of these resources in which to not be weak. We just need to access them and pray that God grants us the grace to attain the particular things contained in those writings. As Jesus didn't hold back on being hardcore. He was saying, if you even look at a woman, you're committing adultery. He said, better for you to cast out your eye than for the entire body to be cast into hell, right? Of course, he wasn't speaking literally, but he was someone who was hyperbolic and demanded an incredibly high standard from his followers. Why would it be any different now?
Yeah. No, I mean that's all very true. The issue I'm just concerned with is I'm unconvinced that we have that. I'm not saying we're devotive saints. Obviously, there are many great saints living today, but I'm unconvinced that we have the level and the level, amount, and caliber of saints that we had in the first 300 years of the church.
I think you have real problems proving that, because you have people like Saint Mother Teresa, somebody who spent 60 years having problems with the mere existence of God, and yet she persists and becomes one of the greatest saints to ever live, right?
I agree. Like, when I said I said there's few, I'm not saying there's none. It's just like the amount of saints in the early church is it's just especially if you compare to the amount of the much smaller amount of Christians there were then. It seems very different from what we have.
It always was the case, though, Settler. Like, for example, when we dug up Pompeii, we found a great amount of pornographic graffiti, like literal pornography, right? The pagan society in which they inherited was so bad that St. Peter called Rome Babylon, right? They lived in a more decadent, more violent, and more unstable society than we did. They literally used to dump the babies they didn't want in a particular part of the city, and then the Christians would go and pick them up to look after them and raise them in the faith, right? They lived in just as intense, if not worse, circumstances than us, right? There is no excuse really for not shooting for that we can possibly come up with that they had. In the words of St. John Chrysostom, if you only had the will, you would grow greater in sanctity than the apostles themselves. It's only a matter of, well, maybe not like, it's not a matter of you possessing the will. God, of course, grants all of this, right? But if you go pursue it, right, God will grant the grace. It's only a matter of us deciding, right, we're going to live this life. We're going to not care what Vosh or whatever ContraPoint's name is. We're not going to care what the left thinks. And if they've got a problem, then they can, they'll do what they'll do. And that's the only way we're going to win against them. We can play clever political games, and that's something that I advocate, right? But the primary focus needs to be virtue here, and needs to be particularly the virtues of loving God, loving neighbor, having faith, and having hope.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with all that.
Yeah. One historic example, and I always like to think about, is I believe it might have been in the 2nd century or the 3rd century. I'm not sure. It was when Christianity was still a persecuted minority religion in the Roman Empire. But what happened is Greeks, as they often do, traveled around and tried to make money, and Greek Christian merchants settled in southern Gaul. And within 50 years, the entire region was Christianized. And as far as I know, there were no apostles, no great saints. What it was businessmen of the time who really believed the faith, lived in such a way, and were such a living testimony to those around them that the area of what is now southern France became Christianized within essentially 2 generations. You don't really see that kind of theme these days, and I think part of it is there's a crisis of faith among Christians themselves, right? So I think Renaissance man, I think you're correct, but part of the problem is we just need to be better Christians at the end of the day.
Yes, exactly, exactly. That's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. Like Moldbug, he says Cthulhu swims to the left, right? But he doesn't seem to come up with the conclusion of what goes right, and that is God, right? God drives towards law and order. God drives towards beauty. God drives towards objective truth, right? He's unwilling to admit that grace and the laws of the covenants are what drive people against Cthulhu, right? And that's the only way we're going to solve this, right? There's going to be as I say, there's room for funny maneuvers, but the fundamental basis needs to be that thing that ultimately drives us right.
Well, I mean, yes, I agree. Moldbug will never really have the right solutions until he becomes Catholic.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like wondering why the car's rolling down the hill when you haven't got the engine on.
Well, I mean, one thing he does say, even though I'm sure he didn't mean it in the Catholic sense here, but that could become worthy, right? And that's something that, as the world continues to break apart and degenerate, and families fall apart, and ridiculous social norms attempt to get instituted, people are just going to be miserable, and they're just going to continue to have hollow lives that don't function the way they were promised. And people who are, set apart and are following God and are building families and are becoming better people and are, doing good works and are contributing to communities, they're going to stand out, right? They're going to look different. And, when things really do come apart, those are going to be the people that are turned to at the end of the day. So, I think that's certainly an important aspect.
Yeah, like who ultimately cares if like Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer or Donald Trump or Joe Biden is in power, right? Things may change based on those people being in power, of course. But what really matters is like, am I living my best life right now? Ultimately, why would anybody from the left? Why would anybody stop going left if you can't show that going right is an objectively better way of living?
Well, I think ultimately that's what's going to come down to, right? It's ultimately going to come down to showing people a better way of living. I think 2020. I said this once and I say it again. The subtitle of 2020, in so many different ways, is we can't keep living like this. And I think that the right wing will only win when we can show people a better way of living. I just don't, the one danger I foresee in your ultimately correct vision, Renaissance man, is I just don't want to end up speaking a language that no one else is speaking. I think a lot of the times, because I consider, when I look at people, say, from Utah and people from California, and I look at them in the 90s, I would say people in Utah were living better lives. But they didn't, something went wrong. And I think what went wrong, and what we need to focus on what went wrong the previous time, right? And that is, I think that the people in San Francisco were basically the ones telling the story and writing it down.
Okay.
And in many ways, the religious people were not speaking the same language as the people that they were communicating with.
Nah, like you see, this is going to sound a bit like a strange diversion, but bring your mind back to Pentecost, right? When St. Peter is speaking in all of the tongues of the particular people there. Now, there's one interpretation that it says, well, he spoke in Aramaic, and the various Greeks, Aramaic people, various Latin speakers understood in their own language. But another interpretation says that he was speaking in the universal language of love, of kindness, of gentleness, of virtue, right? When you see virtue, you don't quibble about it. When you see a hero, you don't like give like a grammatical structure to that. A person knows a hero when they see it. They know a virtuous person when they see it. So regardless of what anybody in San Francisco says, right? If somebody sees you out there in the world right now doing good things, speaking through that grammarless language of human being, right? It won't matter ultimately. Like they can make up their slurs all they like. The pagans did, Celsus did, Porphyry did, and look at them now, right? Who's Porphyry? Who's Celsus? Like who cares what someone in some secular person or leftist in San Francisco says? I mean, we care less about what they say now than pagans did about Celsus or Porphyry back then. We've got it easier. Like, I mean, who's going to read, like, seriously going to sit and read a BuzzFeed article about those cringe Christians and their bigoted attitudes towards marriage in 5 years? Like, there'll be a billion different articles like that, completely worthless.
Well, that's not how it's going to work. What's going to happen is that people are going to get sucked into the lifestyle of progressivism because that's what's easy. And then when it's not satisfying them, they're going to search. They're going to seek out articles or media like that mock Christians, because they're going to need to assure themselves that they're on the right side of this battle.
Well, that assumes that the vast majority of people are in a position of resentment rather than having an objective look at themselves and saying, hey, how can I make life better? Which I'm not sure is something that we can say for the majority of people.
Yes. Well,
and that's increasingly true for a generation. I'm not saying it's a good thing, obviously, but I mean, I don't know. I think that's an increasingly, I mean, it's a sad reality, but it seems to be a reality nonetheless, right?
Well, if they want to be resentful, then that's their choice, right? But they're not going to survive because resentment, being a privation, is something that doesn't last. depressed
But-
people wither and die in their rooms. Like,
No, I know, but I'm this. You're absolutely right about all of this. But I'm just want to add a caveat here: isn't sort of, you know, every generation's mission is to take these eternal truths and to kind of translate them into the age, right? And what I see is, you know, I don't know if we can just end the conversation with the eternal truths of the church father and they had it so much harder than us, and then, you know, and these people are degenerates that they've fallen into this trap of pornography addiction and unsatisfying lifestyles. I know Settlers Lament had a really good video. I don't know if I liked it or not, but everyone should see it. The last edited video on his channel about this meme that's been going around recently about both are a fulfilled woman, like the image of the woman with a family and the one with a wine glass and a pizza. And the message is they're both fulfilled. They're both doing great. How dare you say that one's not doing great?
but she knows she's coping.
Well, yeah, and what's so funny, and Settlers Lament pointed this out, is this is transparently a cope, and not even saying that because I believe that the family is obviously the greater good than the wine glass. I'm just saying that it can be read as a cope from the pure emotional connotations that are coming along with these pieces of art. She's telling us it's a cope. Even if you were a complete nihilist reading these comics, you'd recognize that the person who's drawing the comics does not consider one to be equal. They don't consider the two lives to be of equal good, and they're trying to essentially obfuscate that.
Yeah, I can give him an example from my own life contrary to this, because I had a good friend of mine who was this real gym guy, really into boxing, really into jiu-jitsu and stuff, but he was what we would consider a degenerate. He was someone who used to be with his girlfriend to the point where he would get bored of the act, right? Mm-hmm. He was someone who was like that. And he came into my life at a point where I was, of course, doing the stuff with my channel, and I showed him the videos on Tinder that I made on my Patreon, and he just deleted Tinder right there and then like that. And after that, after I got kicked out of my house as a result of some things that he kind of did, and he observed how I took it, because I understood God had given me an opportunity to build in fortitude, right? You know what he did? He asked me what Bible he should read, and you know what he did? He went and read it, right? If we live these lives, if we witness to this with the people around, then they're going to be attracted to that. And what I think is going on with this woman is that she doesn't actually know any stable family women. It's not like there's like these great big religious families that are very common in, say, San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York.
Quite ironic. That woman is from Hungary.
The woman who's
Budapest is
You
mean the country that has like the second highest level of porn stars in the whole of Europe?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so she's going to be around, like, it's clearly a very divided society. You have the mothers who are raising the families out in the countryside. And, I mean, Budapest is famous for its prostitutes, right? She's probably somebody who's been around that kind of depressed woman forever. Like, you meet these girls, like these girls who are in these nominal relationships and yet will sleep with every single guy that they ever come across who gives them a nice look, because they haven't been around people who are like, I stay with my boyfriend. I'm stable. They've never met a guy that would say no on the basis of virtue, right? She can't actually cogitate on why it would be better that she would be a mother in an experiential sense, because she doesn't know what that's like.
Right, but that's kind of a problem, right? Like that the crushing weight of culture makes it almost impossible, even in countries that some people might find it, to be based in ways to actually process that, right? Like that is the issue, is there's many generations that are captive to this now, and that are functionally unchurched, or even worse, basically hostilely churched against, anything approaching anything you're talking about, and simply can't even see it as preferable. They don't even have the option culturally.
Well, that's why we have to go out and teach them and live better lives.
Yeah, no, but hold on here, and I always want to, when I reply back to this, I probably would want to change the topic, because I think we're just reiterating the same thing. But one last thing, and that is, about a year ago or a year and a half ago, there was this debate between David French and Sohab Armari, and this was one where I was more or less on Sohab's side. And but what was so funny is that there is sort of this David French, who's probably not very loved in reactionary circles, was giving this kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be better individualist argument. And I think that's true to a certain regard, but I think the response was, from Sohab Amari is that's fine, that's good, and everything you're saying is true, but you just can't take people and dump them into a world of pornography and Twitch and video games and zero identity and instant gratification, tell them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and then see how many saints you get on the opposite end of this machine.
I agree.
I want to validate everything you're saying, but I also at the same time want to understand that there's sort of a broader collective and political aspect behind this that Christians need to be aware of. And the conversation needs to always focus on these moments of conversion. But I don't think the conversation can necessarily end there. And that's really what I want to say. But probably, I imagine, well, go ahead. But I imagine we will want to go on at some stage, right?
Well, you see, the thing is, right, like, of course it's going to be an entirely fallible method. There are still going to be a lot of people who are caught in the pornography trap. That's something that we've closed in on ourselves, and that's something that I don't think we can change. But I think that all we can actually do, like, is be an example and, like, teach them and influence where we can, right? I don't see what else we can actually do beyond that.
Well, I think I think that is a problem, though, right? Because what we're talking about, one of the issues that modernity, provides here is we are increasingly less able to influence each other, right? You're increasingly less likely to have organic interactions with people. You're less likely to even legally be able to gather together with people in order to provide the type of influence you're talking about. Most of the forces we're talking about are pushing people into their homes alone for extended amount of time, not able to interact in the ways you talk about. So it's not that you're wrong that these influences aren't essential and what is going to break things through at the end. But I think what Dave might be pointing at here is we have to understand that there are systematic issues and issues that are particular to our culture and what we have become that we need to overcome, we need to understand, and we need to face. And it's not that what you're saying is incorrect, but that we have to also understand that if people are isolated away from these things, they don't even understand how to interact with these concepts. We don't have the kind of institutions that will reinforce them. That creates problems all by themselves that we have to look to, and we have to address those as well as then living good Christian lives, building good families, bringing these values to people.
Well,
and
okay,
I'll
so
confess right here, I feel that I'm just going to drop this bomb. I feel that in 2020 I've been incredibly isolated. I think this is a sentiment that both me and my wife will echo, and it's very difficult to maintain this in isolation, at least for myself. Maybe this is an admission of weakness on my own part, but I find
feel
that,
the same.
Yeah. And so, we're creating this very poisonous environment, right?
Okay, yeah, but what are you going to do about it, right? You work with the tools you've got.
Well, I mean, part of the discussion is to kind of come up with innovative ideas and new things we haven't tried yet, right? I think that, good is good and heroism is heroism, and it's always going to be some variety of that. It's always going to require effort, but I think part of the discussion is just to make sure that our efforts are being used in the right way.
Yeah, and that's ultimately going to correspond to expressing our life being superior to them in some way. Like, it might not be, like in person, but you can do it through the internet. I mean, I do it on my channel, right?
Sure.
Yeah, like you use the media that you have, right? But I'm saying, I frankly think the fundamental issue with society, as I've already said, is degeneracy and vice. And the only way that you're going to address that is through virtue and expressing that, right? So, like, I'm not talking about media. I'm not talking about, like, any various specific tactics here. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't be afraid of what Vosh or any of the other people say, or any of the other right-wingers say. It's a matter of having an objective idea of the world that we live in, a good way of justifying that, and a good way of living it. And people will just be attracted to that by default.
I'm not afraid of Vosh. I'm just kind of disgusted and amazed by the phenomenon, to be quite honest. I mean, it's like saying you're afraid of a car crash that's happening to somebody else.
But you're not. But it's not happening to someone else, though, is it? It's
well,
like,
in some sense, it is. I mean, you know, the kind of horrifying part about Bausch's life is happening to somebody else, right?
Yeah, but we have to cope with that kind of thing in our society at the same time. So we are
exactly
catching ourselves on the wreck.
Well, but I mean, you know, I'm trying to just take stock of the society we live in. We're in a society where a large number of young men look at Bausch's life and think that that's an admirable life to lead.
I don't think they actually do. I really struggle to understand that. And frankly, if people actually think.
But this is, I guess, if you're wondering why I spend mental capacity thinking about this, it's literally coming up with what people are getting out of these people. Because if you understand why people like something, or why people dedicate themselves to some person or idea, you understand it about the way that they're thinking, and that is the key to understanding the right language to communicate to them in.
Dave, like I think it's pretty clearly kind of hate cummies. I think we talked about this earlier on, and if they're going to live a resentful life, then I don't see how you could appeal to resentment without dragging yourself down as well.
I guess. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just kind of, you know, listening to this, I think fundamentally we kind of agree at the core of what is to be done, right? But I guess sort of going back to sort of, I guess, the theme of the stream, the grill pill and all that sort of stuff, what are tactics, ways in which, you know, when confronted with a hostile world politically, morally, and whatnot, sort of how do we deal with it? So where I am, most of the you see sort of
actually sorry to cut you off, but I think if we're changing topics, now would be a good time to do super chats, then we can come back to this.
All right.
Okay. Well, if you're going to do that, just want to say I have to actually go grill steaks for my family. So on that, thanks for having me, everybody. It was great talking to you.
Make sure you keep them rare, mate.
Oh yeah, that's the only way they're allowed in the house. Come on, what am I?
Might have them ketchup. I don't know.
Have a good one.
And everybody subscribe to Aaron. I'll shill him for him.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, everyone does have a channel here, so if you aren't subscribed to all 5 of us, make sure to be. But yes, so first one, 21st Violinist for $5 says, I'm making a comprehensive video on the crypto industry that I want all dissident right thinkers to see. Vital power opening / anti-censorship. Vital power opening / anti-censorship sphere. 21st Reaction was talking with this earlier. I think actually in particular he wanted your thoughts on crypto, Dave.
Well, I mean, I think crypto is the future, but I don't know how fast the future is going to come, and I don't think anyone does, right? I would say that when you say your opinion on crypto, what is that exactly? Does he mean? Like, is it a good investment?
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
I
don't really know anything about crypto. He just talks about it a lot.
There are a lot of scam artists stealing crypto. So, like, by no means should anyone jump into crypto with both feet. And every time I see people doing this, and I want to really yell, stop. I mean, I think it's something to keep an eye on. I think it's something to, if you have a little extra money, you can buy it as a lark, but I don't think that, and I think eventually, like maybe 100 years from now, crypto technology will play a large role in how people independently organize and independently transact with each other. But I don't know how fast that technology is coming. I mean, it could be 20 or 25 years before this really takes off. And in the meantime, you live your life with a bunch of useless currency just sitting around. I don't think that's a way to live. So I keep an eye on it. Dip your toe into the water. Don't jump in is my advice with crypto.
Okay. Thanks. And Narco Republican for $2 says, "Let me grill or give me death." Yep. And Lord Kelvin for $50. Thank you very much for the generous super chat. What do you think of the works of Hideo Kojima? I don't know,
Hideo
Japanese name.
Kojima.
Yes. Metal Gear Solid 2 antagonist is essentially an all-powerful consensus-making AI constructing human thought for the survival of society, a 2001 proto-cathedral. A big up to all you guys. You're doing God's work. Thank you very much for the super chat and the compliment. I've never played any of the Metal Gear Solid games or anything else from this guy, so I have no idea.
I played the first one. Is he talking about Sons of Liberty or whatever that is?
Yeah.
I never played that one. I played the one back that came out like with the original PlayStation. I never played the newer ones.
I've never played it, but I know a friend who is absolutely obsessed with that particular the particular metaphor expressed in that game. So I sort of have an idea what he means, but not enough to really give like an articulated opinion because it's been a few years since I talked about it to him.
No, all my only experience with Metal Gear Solid 2 was being a kid and looking at it in magazines and really wishing I had it and a PS2 to play it on.
Yeah, so sorry, I wish I could give you a better answer, but I've never played.
Hideo Kojima, people have been talking for a long time that he has reactionary themes in his video games. I don't, other than Metal Gear, is there some other game he's done? Does anyone know? Is there anything else besides Metal Gear? Maybe we know about?
No, I don't. Sorry.
I just want to say I do know that this is something people talk a lot about.
And Narco Republican again for $5 recently found out about. I have no idea what this word is. I just. I'll post it in. I'll post it in private chat.
Giambasita Vico, or
yeah.
Vico even. That's a Italian guy, I guess. I mean,
okay.
I recognize it.
Recently found out about Italian thing. Very interesting critique of the Enlightenment with a Catholic view. Think you guys would be interested. Yeah, I mean that sounds interesting. I'll check him out. But I've never heard of it before.
He's one of the early Counter-Enlightenment figures. That's all I know about him.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely be sure to check him out.
I would suspect he's like De Maistra before De Maistra, but I never read him, so.
Okay. And Harris Raymond for $5 American says, "I've noticed that people don't view the world as good versus evil anymore. Why is that, and how can we bring that view back?" Well, I mean, a big part of this is that the left, at least formally, denies the existence of good and evil. To them, they believe that's outdated religious language, and that that good and evil aren't real. That they're just mental constructs.
I like
now, of course, the left doesn't actually believe that.
Yeah. every single one of their expressed content in new media is, this person's a shitty person, that person's a shitty person. They always use shitty person. That's our favorite word, is shitty, and we're supposed to believe these people aren't engaging in any kind of teleology.
It's passive aggressive weakness. Just call them evil. I mean, come on. You're already basically saying that. You're just saying it in the most pathetic way possible.
But you see, if they did that, then they'd have to acknowledge that evil exists. So I think it's kind of one of those things. Yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things that technically they don't, but they certainly act as if they do, because you see this a lot with the left. So they'll have some sort of absurd position, like a good example of this is this guy Thaddeus Russell, who's this. He calls himself a postmodernist, but really he's just like a radical skeptic on everything. But the problem is he doesn't live his life like he's a radical skeptic. You know what I mean? So he doesn't think, is this airplane I'm in really a hot dog? Or he doesn't think like that really, because at a certain point, incoherency takes over and you can't function in the real world. So the same thing with evil, I think, in the left. So I think they're hyper moralistic in their own sort of way without, so on paper they don't believe in evil, but they act as if they do. And evil, of course, is racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, or anything which is not inclusive or accepting of, the latest progressive ideas.
Yeah, I think that puts it well. Argyle Euphoria says for $5, traditionalists, especially religious types, are increasingly pushed into the closet. It's becoming a low status hobby. Yeah, I mean that's definitely true. That's I talk about this a lot. That's
intentional.
Yeah.
Is he calling us gay?
That's true.
I don't know about you. I'm not being pushed in any closets.
No, I'm assuming what he's meaning is traditional viewpoints are just not socially acceptable.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, they're not socially unacceptable. So what?
Yeah. No, but I don't know. I mean, it is a problem. It's like passing down values is difficult when everyone's against you, especially in cases where it's in many cases going to be illegal to hold just like normal Christian viewpoints.
Okay. Okay. Good for the state. Christianity survived. We'll continue to survive. It'll just be harder. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I do think we'll get through this one way or another. Not even the gates of hell and all, but it's not going to be as easy as it used to be.
I think the big problem with this, and sort of what Aron was talking about earlier, and is, and I agree with you, Renaissance Man. The solution is be better Christians fundamentally, but when you have a population which is sort of predisposed to be hostile to the faith or to the truth, as we would put it, it makes it more difficult to sort of get them on side and kind of revive the culture and the faith of our fellow citizens and whatnot. So I think this is a big problem, but addressing it, there's all sorts of ways to skin this cat.
It was never easy. That's the fallacy. It was always very difficult to be genuinely follow Christ, even under Christian civilization.
No, I certainly agree with that. But again, my thing is we live in an age now where even the supernatural in vast swaths of in vast swaths of what was once Christendom is just not believed in anymore. So we're dealing with a post-religious society to a certain extent.
Yeah, and it will soon be a post-existent society if they keep it up.
Yeah.
And Sam153 for $10 Canadian. What's the reality shock that most modern people are going to meet in the near future that may put them on a better path? Well, I mean, the most soon reality shock that I think most people are going to meet, I don't know if this will put them on a better path or not, is going to be that shutting down the entire world's economy for a year is going to have very negative consequences.
Who would have imagined?
Yeah. I don't know if that will necessarily put people on a better path, but that definitely will be a pretty big reality shock whenever that finally sinks in.
I think we haven't seen anything yet. I wouldn't be surprised if sometime this century the entire internet goes down for a significant amount of time.
On account of just them like clamping down on it, or what do you mean?
No, like some sort of maybe a natural aberration, maybe terrorist. I don't know. I can just see, like, say the entire continental United States losing the internet for a significant amount of time, and since they can't get upcomies on social media, they're gonna have to find something else to do.
Yeah, well, that would certainly be interesting to see. Yeah, in sort of where I am, South Africa is a weird situation as far as the lockdown goes, because unfortunately, South Africa takes global best practices under advisement. So with the lockdown policies and whatnot that they were doing in Europe and some of the American states, they actually copied that over here. But the problem is South Africa is a developing country. So what you ended up doing is you totally devastated, like in a way that was much worse than what you saw in Europe, for instance. You devastated the population. So you saw instances of like proper starvation, like malnutrition cases coming back and forth, people dying of, sort of deprivation related illnesses and whatnot because of the lockdowns in mass. And actuaries and stuff were doing some studies, and they found that the lockdown in South Africa probably killed more people than the coronavirus, but they did it anyway. So there was a lot of pressure to sort of, ease up on the hard lockdown, and they have, fortunately, but we're already sort of facing the fallout that I think you guys are going to run into.
Oh, we've already got it here. There was already problems in the summer. I think it was something like 20% of the children had to eat out of food banks, and it's no doubt worse now. Yeah, like don't think that, like, I mean, obviously it's going to be worse in South Africa, but it's not like the developed countries aren't struggling as well. It's just that the media isn't reporting on it quite so openly.
No, I certainly, I believe that, definitely. And but yeah, just for people in the audience to sort of put this in perspective, the country I live in now had a really bad unemployment rate before, and now after the lockdown, the unemployment rate is literally like 45%.
Yikes.
45 fucking percent.
Oh my God. And those people who want jobs too.
Yeah. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
That's
and just one last super chat. Lucas Villantilius for 5 Great British Pounds says, wishing you all a happy and prayerful Advent Sunday. Thank you very much. Everyone make sure to go to church if you can. And I know many of us can't currently. But yeah, so that's it all. Mr. Patriarch, what was the point you were trying to get at before I so rudely interrupted you?
That's all right, man. Were you just going to say something now, Dave?
No. I'll have to go in 5 minutes, but please make your point.
Okay. What was it actually? I think we're talking about. Oh yeah. Okay. So tactics. So I guess we sort of agree on the big picture general solution, right? But the real thing is going back to the grill pill, sort of how do we, under present conditions and, maybe in the face of an increasingly hostile state and, the cathedral, as it were, how do we sort of go forward and sort of what opportunities are there? And, this idea of building organic communities and whatnot, I think is indispensable. And oddly enough, grilling, which is called braaiing, BRAAI, is sort of like the national pastime of South Africa. So we've been doing the grill pill down here for quite a long time, I guess. And the situation down here has been sort of a steady, slow decline for the past 20 years, essentially. And the way people do with it, essentially, is that they do sort of get together and they have a braai, and their social circle becomes pretty close and sort of tight knit. The places where you don't see this, of course, are the same places that you see in Western countries. So in the big metro areas, particularly among the middle class and whatnot, there's a lot of sort of self-isolation. But fortunately, in most of the country, there is still some semblance of community. But there's also all sorts of other problems. So like, single motherhood is a huge problem here in this country. And that leads to, all the expected problems you'd expect to find, gang activity, drug dependence and whatnot. So it's kind of a mess, really. So, and of course, because of the different political problems and racial tensions and whatnot, people aren't too comfortable going outside of their own in-group. And that's just sort of a fact of living here. So the grill pill sort of works, but sort of in a limited degree. So I think in the specific context I find myself, the real kicker is trying to find overlap. So you get your community to sort of build bridges to other ones. And I think that's sort of the tricky situation I find myself here in South Africa. So like with my Anglo friends and even some of my Afrikaans buddies and coloreds and whatnot, it's easier to sort of relate to them and sort of build a community. But for somebody living, who speaks Xhosa and lives in Kailicha, building a bridge to them is a bit more of a difficult project. So I guess, at the end of the day, the big question is how do we sort of, the grill pill is a good idea and all, but how do we reach outside of our bubble?
Actually, I just wanted to mention to Settler, you actually missed a super chat from Harris Raymond.
Oh yeah, that just came in when I was finishing. I thought I'd get to that later.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because he's put his money down.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we can do that now then. Harris Raymond for $5. What would it take to convert BreadTube and other leftists to Christianity?
A miracle?
God is the first
Well,
step there.
I'll answer that more temporally. Obviously, God. I think that they have to see that their idol fails, right? I think you have to smash the idol that's in front of them, or they have to smash it themselves. And I think that might be coming sooner than we might imagine.
I think the biggest thing that could benefit them would be a long, hard look in the mirror and realizing that they're not living in accordance with how they should.
Yeah, and I mean the tricky part is it is a total religious conversion for them, if they want to become real Christians, and unless we're talking about the very bad Lutherans or something like that. And I don't mean Lutherans in general. I mean the really bad Lutheran churches, like the pride flag ones. But if you want them to become any sort of actual Christian, they need to give up a lot of stuff. And they don't need to give up their views on tax policy. But they need to have radically different views from what most leftists currently have, and that sort of identity change is not easy.
Actually, important message from Pope Francis in one of his addresses. He said the evangelism of the church needs to be less autistic, right? And this is the kind of autism I mean. These churches that say, "Oh, we accept the world," right? No, we don't. We've never been about that, and we're never gonna be about that, right? We need to build relationships with human beings as distinct things. We can't say, "Oh, we tolerate the pride flag on the altar." That's just completely nullifies the point of the church. You cannot adapt to the world and try and pretend to be cool. That's just not going to be appealing to anyone. But like doing the whole Mount Athos thing, the hard fasting, the living the life of intense virtue and living in a way that is so completely different, yet not so not in an obviously disgusting way, right? That will appeal to people.
Yeah, but I guess sort of my last question was kind of, and it's it's related to sort of what you just said, is beyond our own sort of small circles, how do we break out into the larger culture, I guess, and particularly how do we break out and reach possibly groups that are quite different from us?
Wait, you're asking me the question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were asking generally. So how do you break outside of the groups? Well, you make more friends.
Hard to do in this era of lockdown. Hey guys, I got to get going and get back to work, but thanks for having me, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much for coming, Dave.
Yeah,
Thanks. God
You
bless.
gotta have but to continue on what I was saying, you gotta have your fingers in as many pies as possible, right? I'm involved in not just the church at my university. I'm thinking of going back to the debating society. I'm looking into the creative writing society, which is filled with people who are very leftist. You're at uni, you might not be able to meet the people in person, but make your views clear wherever you find other people. And especially if you can articulate them well, then you're going to get interest from people. They're going to recognize you as somebody of competence. And then from there, you build a relationship as you do with any other friendship.
Terrific. Word.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess now seems like a decent time to end off, unless anyone has anything they really want to get out.
I guess it should be time for me to go. It's about 1:48 a.m. over here, so I need to be getting to bed as well. But no, thank you very much for having me on, Settler. And if anyone's interested in history videos about fascism or anything else, go subscribe to my channel and go check it out.
Yeah, and also, of course, make sure to go to Renaissance Man's channel. His link's in the description too, and subscribe there. And also everyone, join my Discord server if you're interested in that. Links for that's in the description. Follow me on Twitter and donate to me on Subscribestar or Patreon. I appreciate all donations, of course, but Subscribestar takes a significantly smaller cut than YouTube, so that's very appreciated. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us.